This hearing of the subcommittee is now called to order. We have votes scheduled for 3 o'clock, which is troublesome to our schedule here in this subcommittee. We'll see how this goes as far as how we handle that circumstance when it arises. I'd like to first thank the witnesses today for participating in this, what I think is a very important hearing regarding international soccer governance. I'm not one who generally thinks Congress should investigate every scandal in the world of professional sports. Nor do I believe that the topics we are discussing today will lead to legislation that must be enacted. But as chairman of this subcommittee with jurisdiction over professional sports, I do believe this is a significant issue that deserves public attention. By shining light on the corruption, bribery, and other criminal activity that has been a part of international soccer for far too long, my hope is that the American people, current and future sponsors, and media companies that support the games today will better understand the consequences of allowing the organizations governing soccer to continue without reform, including the tragic loss of life. According to some reports, as many as 4,000 migrant workers will die before the first ball is kicked in the 2022 World Cup. That is appalling. Soccer is by far the most popular sport in the world. It is truly a global institution that connects humanity across language, culture, and continent. Soccer is attracting a wider audience by the day right here in the United States. One must look no further than the excitement surrounding the U.S. women's national team winning the 2015 Women's World Cup last week to see the impact that soccer has on lives. Along with this excitement comes billions of dollars of annual revenue from TV contracts, sponsorships, and endorsements. That's why the revelations of bribery, corruption, and mismanagement at FIFA and CONCACAF are so troubling. I'm even more disturbed by the reports of migrant workers losing their lives in preparation for the world's biggest soccer tournament, the World Cup. In fact, bribery, corruption, and criminal activity within international soccer is so serious that on May the 27th, 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a 47-count indictment against 9 FIFA officials and 5 corporate executives, charging the defendants with racketeering, bribery, wire fraud, and money laundering. 4 other individuals and 2 corporate defendants have also pled guilty to various charges. And Swiss investigators are now investigating 81 suspicious activities related to money laundering in connection with the 2018 and 2022 World Cup bids. The culture of corruption must be addressed. With the announcement that FIFA President Blatter plans to step down, we're at a crossroads for the future of soccer. Now is the time for the United States and the U.S. Soccer Federation to engage and determine how we can encourage meaningful reforms, as well as elect a leader at FIFA who will spearhead long overdue changes within the organization. The goal of this hearing is to have a serious and meaningful conversation about how to address FIFA's culture of corruption, the United States' participation in the organization, and the human rights violations stemming from the organization's lapses in integrity. Without evidence that reforms are being implemented, we must examine our country's own participation in FIFA and how it can restore integrity to the world of soccer. We cannot, should not, must not turn a blind eye to this issue any longer, especially when human lives are at stake. I'd now like to turn to the ranking member, Senator Blumenthal, for his opening statement. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for having this hearing and for our witnesses being here. I also want to thank the Department of Justice for its vigorous and profoundly significant investigation. And I want to note that soccer is a growing and important sport in the United States, and we can all take pride and enjoyment from the game, most especially from the wonderful and convincing win last month by our world champion women's team. And I want to congratulate them and say very bluntly that the corruption uncovered in world soccer is a disservice to the game, It is a disrespect to them. It betrays the trust of countless men and women, many of them young people just beginning in this sport, who have a right to expect better from the leaders of this sport. The fact of the matter is that what has been revealed so far is a mafia-style crime syndicate in charge of this sport. My only hesitation in using that term is that it is almost insulting to the mafia, because the mafia would never have been so blatant, overt, and arrogant in its corruption. The simple fact is that this indictment, more than 100 pages long, shows a crime organization, a racketeering conspiracy. It has an organizational chart that shows how it was run. And the question is, who knew about this criminal wrongdoing? When did they know it? And what did they know? Why did they not act more quickly? And those are the questions that U.S. Soccer Federation has to answer today. These are classic questions involved in any racketeering conspiracy investigation, and that's why there is, in fact, an ongoing criminal investigation. We know some of the individuals who were responsible and should be held accountable. At least one of the principals has pleaded guilty already, and others may be cooperating. But the facts show that there had to be either willful ignorance or blatant incompetence on the part of many of the members of this organization. And that's true of U.S. Soccer as well. They either knew about it or they should have known about it. And I'm not sure which is worse. The recent success of our professional women's soccer team should remind us, and all Americans, that FIFA, the international organization responsible for regulating and promoting soccer, has engaged in this willful and prolonged, disgracefully corrupt conduct, including wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering practices spanning more than 2 decades. Many of these crimes were committed in the United States, which is especially troubling. I am saddened by the fact that these corrupt practices over many years have deprived American national teams, our youth leagues, and millions of American soccer fans of the full value and integrity of the game they love. The actions of FIFA's international and regional soccer officials have undermined the very sport this organization was established to serve. And this hearing is an opportunity for us not only to ask these questions about who knew what when and why they didn't do anything about it, but also to lay the groundwork for reform. Just as sports scandals in the past have led to fundamental, far-reaching overhauls in the way those sports are organized and conducted. I want to know what reforms the U.S. Soccer Federation is planning to introduce to instill greater transparency and accountability in the governance of soccer in America. Not whether, but what and when, because clearly there is an urgent and immediate need for such reforms. But I also believe that America's National Soccer Federation has those serious questions to answer. And I think it has to answer them not only at this hearing, but for its fans around this country. Clearly, we can no longer indulge the idea of FIFA, a multi-billion-dollar, non-profit global enterprise being run behind closed doors. That is a recipe for disaster and moral catastrophe. Only reforms that install greater transparency and accountability can shed the necessary sunlight required to disinfect this corrupt organization. One proposal is, in fact, to reorganize it as a public corporation, or some part of it as a public corporation. I'm proud that the United States has led the world in bringing these scandals to light and holding individuals responsible. But that job is far from over. There needs to be additional action, and it should involve not only members of the public and public officials, but also, and let me emphasize, the private corporations that sponsor these events. Corporate organizations that sponsor international soccer, like McDonald's, Nike, Coca-Cola, and Visa, play their part by ensuring that they stand as guardians of good governance. They must do so rather than silent beneficiaries who benefit from opaque governance. And at least one of those corporations is mentioned without naming it in the indictment. As my colleague, Senator Moran, has just mentioned, these actions have real-life consequences, not only financially, but in potential discrimination against women in the game and potential physical harm to the workers who have been involved and may be involved in other countries where major physical construction involves human trafficking and human rights abuse and worse. The international community must collectively work to ensure that human rights are upheld wherever our athletes compete. The betrayal of trust is no less when human trafficking is involved in building the stadiums where our athletes compete. It's a betrayal of trust on the part of those organizations that sponsor the game, and it implicates the entire sport. We should not tolerate the world's most preeminent sporting competitions being staged at the expense of our most vulnerable citizens. Today's hearing is a first step, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. I look forward to your testimony and to restoring the trust of American fans, trust which has been betrayed, but which they certainly deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. Our panel today for this hearing consists of 4 witnesses. Mr. Dan Flynn, who's the CEO and Secretary General of the U.S. Soccer Federation. That is the United States' representative at FIFA and CONCACAF. Mr. Michael Hershman. Mr. Hershman is the President and CEO of the Fairfax Group, member of FIFA's Independent Governance Committee. Mr. Sanjie Barry is the Advocacy Director for the Middle East and North Africa, Amnesty International, the United States of America. He will testify about findings of the May 2015 Amnesty International report regarding working conditions. And finally, Mr. Andrew Jennings, who has traveled perhaps the furthest to join us. He's an investigative writer and filmmaker, credited with blowing cover on FIFA scandal. We will start with Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn, please testify.
Thank you, Senator. On behalf of the United States Soccer Federation, I would like to thank Senator Moran, Senator Blumenthal, Senators Blunt and McCaskill from my home state of Missouri, and other members of this subcommittee for giving U.S. Soccer the opportunity to appear today and answer questions you may have. On behalf of our women's national team, I would like to also thank President and Mrs. Obama, Vice President and Dr. Biden, distinguished members of this subcommittee, your Senate and House colleagues, and the tens of millions of fans in the United States, including the largest television audience ever to watch a soccer match in this country, who supported and cheered this wonderful group of women to the Women's World Cup title just 10 days ago. I am Daniel Flynn, and I have been U.S. Soccer's Chief Executive Officer and Secretary General for the last 15 years, and I'm ultimately responsible for the day-to-day operations of the Federation. We are a nonprofit membership organization recognized by the U.S. Olympic Committee as the national governing body for soccer and by FIFA, the world's governing body for the sport of soccer, as its National Association member for the United States. As required by FIFA, we are also a member of CONCACAF, the Regional Confederation, which covers the North and Central America and Caribbean nations. For more than 100 years, U.S. Soccer's mission has been to make soccer a preeminent sport in the United States and to continue the growth and development of the sport at all levels. U.S. Soccer directly fields 17 national teams, including the women's national team, which has won 3 World Cup titles and 4 Olympic gold medals, and the men's national team, which is in the process of defending its 2013 CONCACAF Gold Cup title. We also field the National Paralympic team and numerous age-based boys and girls national teams. U.S. Soccer is made up of various member organizations, including, among others, our professional leagues, the adult amateur leagues, soccer organizations for disabled athletes, and the youth amateur organizations. U.S. Soccer is governed by a 15-person volunteer board of directors elected by its members, which includes independent directors, athlete representatives, and directors representing different segments of our membership. Our annual tax returns, audited financial statements, business plans, bylaws, policy, and board of director meeting minutes are all publicly available on our website. In FIFA, we are one of 209 National Association members. FIFA members must vote on any substantial changes to the organization, and the vote of every member, regardless of the size, the number of players, or the quality of their national teams, counts the same. Until 2 years ago, when our president, Sunil Gulati, was elected to the FIFA Executive Committee, the Federation did not have a direct representative on that important policy-making body. Although our role and influence in FIFA has historically been limited, the Federation has been a strong advocate for reforming the organization by, among other things, improving governance, increasing transparency, and strengthening ethics rules. U.S. Soccer supported FIFA's decision in 2011 to engage experts to conduct a review of its governance structure, and then urged the adoption of the reforms after the governance report was released. U.S. Soccer supported the investigation by the FIFA Ethics Committee into the bidding and award processes for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, and publicly advocated for the release of the full investigative report, not just the summary report released by FIFA last fall. U.S. Soccer was one of the national associations which nominated Prince Ali and then publicly supported his challenge to FIFA's longstanding president, Mr. Sepp Blatter, in the recent election. We did so notwithstanding the potential political risk, including the potential impact on our possible bid to host the 2026 Men's World Cup. But U.S. Soccer believes good governance and good leadership at FIFA is paramount and more important to the sport than hosting any individual World Cup. Going forward, we believe reform will have to start at the top, beginning with the election of a new FIFA president in light of Mr. Blatter's stated intention to resign. U.S. Soccer will look to the new president to lead this reform. We understand that many traditional soccer powers also believe it is time for a change. U.S. Soccer will continue to work with like-minded national associations and confederations to promote change and to alter the culture at FIFA. At CONCACAF, efforts at reform have proceeded more rapidly. In light of the recent events, CONCACAF appointed a 3-person special committee, which includes U.S. Soccer's President Sunil Gulati, to help guide the Confederation through this period of turmoil. And over the July 4th weekend, CONCACAF Executive Committee, based on the recommendations of the special committee, unanimously approved a series of sweeping reforms to address governance, fraud prevention, and compliance and transparency. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to responding to specific questions you may have on this or other subjects.
Mr. Flynn, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Hershman.
Good afternoon, Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today alongside such esteemed colleagues in the field of transparency and integrity in the global world of sports. I'm honored to speak on an issue that has been a passion and driving force throughout my career, including having served for 2 years on the Independent Governance Committee of FIFA and as co-founder of Transparency International, the world's leading NGO on issues relating to transparency and accountability. Additionally, I'm currently spearheading an integrity project in sports as an advisory board member for the International Center for Sports Security. As Senator Moran has stated before, soccer is by far the most popular sport in the world, and it is attracting a wider audience by the day in the United States. However, the upper echelons of the sports governing body have been notoriously corrupt for many years, until the laudable recent efforts of the U.S. Justice Department and the FBI. Many allegations were mostly swept under the rug. Now that FIFA's lack of transparency and accountability has been brought into the global public attention, there's a tremendous opportunity to discuss the inherent autonomy in sporting organizations. Sports organizations have long maintained that autonomy is essential to the preservation of the values embedded in sport. This is a difficult concept to argue with. That is, until the core values in sport are undermined by a lack of accountability and trust, which we've seen recently in one of the world's largest, most profitable sporting bodies, FIFA. The growing commercial interests at play, the protections that many governments offer large sporting organizations, and the rapidly growing sports gambling industry, both legal and illegal, are all converging to create a situation where self-regulation is increasingly challenging. The sports industry must put in place governance and compliance standards which demonstrate the best practices in transparency and accountability. FIFA is a big business with revenue of about $5.6 billion every four-year World Cup cycle. And FIFA had a chance to be a leader in reform when the scandals first began popping up about 10 years ago. Despite multiple chances to change after being presented with reform proposals by Transparency International, as well as our own independent governance committee, FIFA held to the irresponsible notion that it was autonomous and did not have to adhere to outside oversight or interference. The U.S. public cannot assume that FIFA is the only sporting body with endemic structural problems. Every single governing body in the sports world, from the International Olympic Committee to the ICC to the NFL, needs to agree to modern standards of transparency and accountability. While many people around the world hold sport as sacred, it has become an incredibly profitable industry that needs to be regulated and treated for what it is, big business. These recent events are bigger than FIFA. They require coordinated global action across all sporting bodies. And I believe there is a way we can achieve this reform with the cooperation and support from governments and sport industry leaders around the world. The International Center for Sports Security, which is also a nonprofit organization, has borne the idea of the Sports Industry Transparency Initiative. I serve on their board of advisors, and we have established a set of global standards which would be voluntarily adopted by sports organizations. This collective action agreement will form a governing group that would work with the sports community to promote transparency and accountability while strengthening a higher standard of ethics and values in sports. These standards would finally create a benchmark to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of sports governance and compliance programs. The standards would include, but not be limited to, professionalizing boards of directors in sports, managing conflicts of interest, building a democratic foundation, embracing transparency and accountability, leveling the playing field for athletes, men and women, motivating ethical behavior for staff and volunteers, engaging with key stakeholders, showcasing sport event integrity, considering the positive role of sport in society, and establishing effective risk controls. This approach will be comprehensive and far-reaching. While every principle does not apply to all sports organizations, there is enough common ground to ensure that sports groups understand what is expected of them in terms of integrity and transparency. As Attorney General Loretta Lynch so rightly pointed out in her speech after announcing the FIFA charges, many of the individuals and organizations we will describe today were entrusted with keeping soccer open and accessible to all. They held important responsibilities at every level, from building soccer fields for children in developing countries to organizing the World Cup. They were expected to uphold the rules that keep soccer honest and protect the integrity of the game. Instead, they corrupted the business of worldwide soccer to serve their interests and enrich themselves. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I look forward to answering your question and those of the committee members.
Mr. Hershman, thank you. Mr. Barry, welcome, and we welcome your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Moran.
You need to turn on your microphone, please.
Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, Senator Gardner, Senator Daines, and distinguished guests. On behalf of Amnesty International, thank you for the opportunity to address the issue of human rights in Qatar and the 2022 FIFA World Cup. The 2022 FIFA World Cup has brought into global focus the shocking conditions that are routine for migrant workers in Qatar. Under Qatar's kafala employment sponsorship system, foreign migrant workers cannot change employers or leave Qatar without the permission of their current employer. Even if an employer is not paying the employer can still block the employee from changing jobs or leaving the country. In 2012, the Qatar National Research Fund funded a survey of some 1,000 low-income labor migrants. 90% of migrants said their employers possessed their passports, a violation of poorly enforced Qatari law. 20% said their salary was different than the salary they had been promised prior to leaving their home country. 21% said they sometimes, rarely, or never received their salary on time. As documented by Amnesty International researchers James Lynch and Mustafa Qadri, in the most extreme examples, foreign migrant workers in Qatar have become suicidal after being trapped without pay by employers. They have been forced to depend on charity from others simply to eat. Meanwhile, their family members in poor communities in their countries of origin can face eviction and other serious challenges because a family member is trapped in Qatar and not being paid for work they have done. There are an astounding more than 1.5 million foreign nationals working in Qatar today. Well over 90% of the total workforce in Qatar consists of foreign nationals. These numbers have increased at a dramatic rate, with Qatar's population growing by a staggering 43% since the country was awarded the World Cup in December 2010. This is occurring in the context of a massive construction boom in the country. The government of Qatar is spending hundreds of billions of dollars in a massive infrastructure development program. This new construction goes well beyond stadiums. Many of these construction projects aren't solely for the World Cup, but they remain central to the success of this sporting event and the overlapping effort to make Qatar a global destination for tourism and commerce. The problems faced by foreign migrant workers in Qatar go beyond the restrictions placed by the kafala employer sponsorship system. Foreign migrant workers are forbidden from forming or joining trade unions. While Qatar does have labor laws which should offer some protection for workers, these are not enforced effectively. To make matters even worse, thousands of foreign migrant workers in domestic service roles are specifically excluded from the protections set out under Qatar's poorly enforced labor law. These migrant workers, who are mainly women working in households, are exposed to even greater labor exploitation and abuse, including sexual violence. Now, despite repeated announcements to the contrary, the government of Qatar has failed to address the problem of labor exploitation. In May of 2014, the Qatar government promised some limited reforms to address the widespread exploitation of migrant workers in the country. But 1 year later, none of these reforms have been implemented. In 2014, Amnesty International identified 9 key labor exploitation issues that Qatar should address urgently. 1 year later, nothing has changed in 4 of the most critical areas of abuse. Only limited actions have been taken in the remaining 5 areas, actions which do not address the fundamental structural factors that facilitate abuse in Qatar. The ultimate responsibility for the rights of workers in Qatar rests with the Qatari authorities. But when FIFA awarded the 2022 World Cup to Qatar, it assumed a responsibility for the human rights impact of that decision. Unfortunately, FIFA's efforts have fallen far short of the concrete action needed to ensure that the World Cup in Qatar is not based on labor exploitation. In my written testimony, I've outlined specific solutions to Qatar's problem of labor exploitation. These solutions should be implemented by the government of Qatar, FIFA, companies in the construction sector, and countries that migrant workers are from. The United States government can help in specific ways. For the government of Qatar, the solution, of course, is to fix its deeply flawed kafala sponsorship system and address the many other problems that I've highlighted today. For FIFA, it is not enough for the organization's officials to simply accept the verbal commitments of the government of Qatar. FIFA must send a strong public message to the Qatari authorities and the construction sector that human rights must be respected in all World Cup-related construction projects, and FIFA must put in place effective systems to monitor and report on this. This includes not only stadiums and training facilities, but also hotels, transportation projects, and other infrastructure. If reforms are not put in place urgently, the facilities for the 2022 World Cup will carry the permanent stain of forced labor and human suffering. On behalf of Amnesty International, thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Mr. Barry, thank you for testifying. Mr. Jennings, welcome, and we welcome your testimony.
Chairman Moran, ranking member of Blumenthal, I hope I know the proper way to do this. I did testify here a lot.
You've come a long way. We want to hear you.
I testified to John McCain back in 1999 on the Olympic scandals, but it's all changed since then. Now, look, I'd like to join with everybody else in honouring America's soccer players and the gracious way they and the other 23 teams conducted themselves at the Women's World Cup. And this contrasts sadly with the massive deficiencies of the US Soccer Federation, frightened to upset President Blatter's corrupt FIFA while enjoying the elite lifestyle that he provides. We're here to discuss how American soccer relates to FIFA. I note the absence of your FIFA delegate, Mr. Sunil Gulati. That's one crucial question today. Where's Sunil? Where is he? He's the man who takes American values, supposedly, to FIFA and to CONCACAF, and he's not here to talk about it. It rather undermines the whole process, I think. Anyway, I'm an investigative reporter. I write books and I present documentaries for the BBC. I've worked with CBS's 60 Minutes and with Frank DeFord at HBO's Real Sport. I also have reported from war zones in Beirut, Chechnya, and Central America. I'm not a sports reporter. Send me to the match and I might get the scoreline wrong. It's not what I do. I'm very proud of being the only reporter in the world banned by Mr. Blatter because of my disclosures of his corruption over the last 13 years. Before stumbling on the FIFA lowlifes, I had experience of organised crime filming nose to nose with the mafia in Palermo. Blatter's FIFA ticks all the boxes defining an organised crime syndicate: seizing and holding power, massive stealing, running rackets, compromising and outwitting the public authorities, and hiding their criminality behind the world's most popular game. After 7 years of probing these sleazebags and putting up with their legal threats and their attacks on my computers, I was invited to meet FBI special agents in London. Their business cards said, organised crime. I wasn't alone anymore. The real people had arrived. In August 2011, I gave them financial and other documents about America, that America's Chuck Blazer had hid from the fans and the public. And by the way, you talked a moment ago about not having Mr. Flynn a representative at FIFA. Chuck Blazer was there since 1995. You were represented. Look who represented you. Look who US soccer was happy to have representing American values. I hope you can come back to that. Chuck Blazer had hidden all this financial information from the fans and the public. My source obtained them from the archives of CONCACAF, as you know, the regional body of 35 footballing nations, including the USA. They were circulated privately to all executive committee members of CONCACAF, including US soccer, who also suppressed them. US soccer had to know that Blazer and his fellow crook Jack Warner from Trinidad, fighting extradition at the moment, with the approval of Blatter, were looting regional football and evading rightful taxes, but they looked away. I've got a long list here, I don't have time to go into now, of the failings of US soccer with CONCACAF and with Blatter. I'd be happy to present it to any of you and discuss it later. Now, if America's soccer leaders had taken action when they should have done, Blazer and Warner would have been in jail, Blatter seeking asylum in Zimbabwe, and the 2022 World Cup being hosted by the USA, not some graveyards in the Gulf. It only took the FBI and the IRS a few weeks to check out the information that I gave them. They arrested Chuck Blazer, he immediately turned informant, and FIFA has imploded. FIFA is now a smelly shell. That's all. Has no credibility. We don't want to know it. Nobody wants to know it. You know, once upon a time, FIFA officials would walk down the street with the FIFA blazer, the logo. I'm from FIFA. I'm important. Who would do that now? Who would dare do that now? None of them. And that's how we sum FIFA now. Blatter's determined to stay in power. I don't believe this nonsense about he's going. Watch his words carefully. I've put down my mandate, but I'll pick it up again. His hitmen are working to eliminate rivals. His handpicked ethics committee are, oh God, I'm running over time, to obey his instructions. His PR operation briefs the wire services that he's innocent. But this international sports leader can only travel to Doha, Russia, and stay in Switzerland. That's not an international leader. Now, what America can do is engage with clean, decent football associations around the world, create a new organization based in another land, and invite sponsors and TV networks to go with them. I can't see Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Visa preferring the remnants of Blatter's organized crime family. And there is one other crucial thing that US soccer should do. Some of you may remember that when the US Olympic Committee was in disarray over the Salt Lake scandal 16 years ago, they called in Senator George Mitchell and Ken Duberstein to investigate where they'd gone wrong with the IOC and make recommendations of reform. External, respected, non-partisan investigation. This committee could help US soccer set up a similar independent committee to find out what on earth has gone so badly wrong and has been covered up. Also, US soccer could do what your government does, which is put everything online. A 990 form is inadequate. And then this new, reorganized, reinvigorated US soccer could really say to the world, look, this is how it's done. We're not America pushing you around. We're saying, but we can do it. It's all wide open. Join with us. And an awful lot of the 209 national associations will come with you. Finishing off, next Monday, Mr. Galassi, the absent Mr. Galassi, who I think is treating you with contempt. I think he's treating US soccer, the men and women, the mums and dads, the people who run the line, the whole sport with contempt when he can't come here and defend US soccer's activities in CONCACAF and in FIFA. And so he's going over to Zurich next week for a private meeting of the what's left of the leaders of FIFA who aren't in jail. And I urge, and I hope everyone else would urge Mr. Galati to today email Blatter and say, when I get to Zurich, I want all your pay slips. I want to know everything you paid yourself, your perks, your bonuses, your per diems, and I want it on the desk now, because if it's not there, I'm coming home, I'm going to help America kickstart the reform. That's what you've got to do as a country to get some credibility back internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Let me start with Mr. Flynn in asking a question. You heard Mr. Jennings just say that U.S. soccer had to know. So the question is, what did U.S. soccer know? What should you have known? And in particular, with the indictments that allege racketeering, bribery, wire fraud, money laundering, what's the reaction of U.S. Soccer Federation to that? At the charges at FIFA, the executives and board members, and also, what does U.S. Soccer Federation know about CONCACAF in similar circumstances? It's perceived as the most corrupt of the very regional associations. What does U.S. Soccer Federation know?
Thank you, Senator. I knew nothing about any corruption.
Let me interrupt just one moment, Mr. Flynn. When you say you knew nothing, you speak just for you personally?
I will say I or anybody that I've worked with has not brought anything to my attention, cold hard facts regarding corruption within FIFA or CONCACAF. That being said, there's a couple of things I'd like to point out in terms of Mr. Blazer has not been involved with U.S. soccer since 1986. He has been a member of CONCACAF and FIFA, but not, I repeat, not U.S. soccer since 1986. In terms of Mr. Blatter and Mr. Werner's activities, I'd like to point out that those were private, individual, secret transactions that, with the full resources of the Department of Justice and the FBI, took 4 years to bring to light. We are a soccer organization with our greatest focus on developing all aspects of our sport in this country. So I wanted to point out that those private transactions also were for regional sponsorship and regional broadcast rights. That has nothing to do with U.S. soccer and our rights and our TV and our sponsorship. So I think that's an important point of distinction I'd like to make.
Mr. Flynn, thank you. Let me ask a follow-up question then to that. So when the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced indictments, you and your colleagues at the U.S. Soccer Federation would be surprised that there would be some activity occurring at FIFA or CONCACAF that would result in indictments? That would be a surprise to you?
Senator, I was not aware of any part of that investigation of the Department of Justice.
But the fact that someone was indicted surprises you?
I just wasn't involved. And my focus and that of my day-to-day focus is to stay focused on the domestic side of our business. So I just didn't have any knowledge, nor anybody that I work with had any knowledge of it.
All right, let me try to tie something together because it may be confusing as to why we're having a hearing that involves Mr. Barry, for example. My question perhaps to you, Mr. Barry, but to others as well, Mr. Hershman, Mr. Jennings, even Mr. Flynn, we've heard Mr. Barry's testimony about the conditions involving the preparation for the 2022 soccer World Cup. What's the relationship between the testimony that we're hearing, Mr. Barry, about corruption, bribery, racketeering, criminal activity related to FIFA, and the findings that your organization has made in regard to what's going on in preparation for that World Cup? How do those, is our hearing, are these two contrasting kinds of stories that don't belong together, or are they intimately tied to each other?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. At the end of the day, when FIFA made a decision to grant the bid for the 2022 World Cup to occur in Qatar, it took responsibility for the human rights impacts of that decision.
How can you say that? Why is that true?
Because FIFA, as an international organization with $1 billion plus in reserves, has a responsibility under UN principles to ensure that its operations do not turn a blind eye to or directly involve serious human rights abuses. And it's pretty clear that human rights abuses and labor exploitation are rampant in Qatar today. Not only that, but Amnesty International's latest report shows that the government of Qatar has yet to do anything serious or substantial about the basic labor exploitation there. So the question remains as to why it was that FIFA did not go more deeply into these questions of labor exploitation in the process. Now, FIFA has said at this point in time that in 2026, for the 2026 process, they are going to incorporate human rights concerns. But why has it taken until the 2026 process for these questions to be raised?
Mr. Jennings, let me ask you, is there a relationship between what you describe in your testimony and the testimony that Mr. Barry has describing conditions leading up to the preparation of 2022? How do they relate?
Take a step back. US soccer has its failings. So do the leaders of English soccer. They should have known better than ever to bid for that World Cup, because we all know in the business that you have to pay to play. And I don't think the US pays bribes. I'm pretty sure the English don't. You don't get in a race where you're going to get bribed off the planet. Let's bear that in mind. It was a dirty decision to put a World Cup on a strip of sand that was broiling. People would die if there was a summer tournament there. FIFA knew, and you have to wonder why certain people, despite that at FIFA, voted for the World Cup to go there. And it's got worse. They've had another meeting now, knowing that can't happen, what Blatter calls stakeholders, which is all his friends and no fans. And they are moving it to November, December of the World Cup year. Now, if you want to die young, come to England and stand outside Arsenal, Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool, Everton, all the big clubs. And as the fans come out and say, hey, we're going to stop you having football for 7 weeks because Jack Warner took the money. I hope it's a painless death. You can't walk into somebody else's sports culture and just take it away. But that's what Blatter's doing now. And who's questioning him? I don't see any of the officials from US Soccer saying, no, 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 we're friends with the English and the German and the Dutch and all the other Western European federations are going to have to stop their game because of the dirty slime bags at FIFA. That's the background to it. The money went in from somewhere. I'm not saying where it went in. There's a lot of investigation still going on. But it went in, and the lowlifes on the FIFA Executive Committee voted for something which is ending up with the death of migrant workers. It's, and I just would say one other thing here. We have a saying in European football when officials, administrators can't remember what happened. I don't know, I wasn't there, I can't remember. And we say, oh yeah, well, when they were younger, they must have headed that big wet football too many times because the scandals of CONCACAF and Jack Warner's ticket rackets go back to public knowledge, back to 2002, again in 2006, again in 2010, richly documented that racketeering was a way of life at CONCACAF, but apparently that news never reached the Chicago offices of US Soccer Federation.
Mr. Jennings, let me turn to Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Flynn, I appreciate your being here today. I understand it's your testimony that you had no knowledge about this corruption before May of this year when the Department of Justice issued its indictment. Is that correct? You had no knowledge?
That's correct. That is correct.
Did you have suspicions?
There were moments I would describe, if I had a level of discomfort, I would not participate and I would just get myself out of any situation that offered any level of discomfort to me.
So there was evidence that caused you to remove yourself from discussions or meetings?
I wouldn't say evidence, I'd say I think it was a comfort level.
And when did that lack of comfort level begin?
I couldn't pinpoint any particular time.
Years before the
necessarily.
indictment, correct?
I wouldn't necessarily say years. It'd be hard to pinpoint the time.
Months?
I think it'd be fair to say greater than months, but once again, it'd be hard to pinpoint exact time frames.
Did you make any effort to investigate?
If there was cold facts, I would have brought that to the attention of the appropriate people. There was nothing in the way of any facts that I could take to anybody else. And obviously would consult our outside counsel, but that's as far as I would take because it was something that it was, as I said, it was a discomfort level.
But you made no effort to investigate, and your outside counsel did not tell you to investigate.
No, I just passed along my level of discomfort.
Would you agree in retrospect that U.S. Soccer acted inadequately to investigate or prevent or stop the ongoing blatant criminal wrongdoing at FIFA?
I wouldn't say that we would do it differently. What our focus has been is we really have two choices. We're one of 209 national associations. And we have to really, at the end of the day, find a way to participate in a manner consistent with our mission and our core values. And we think one of the ways to do that is, starting in 2013, we finally had somebody on the FIFA Exco that was with U.S. Soccer. That was a start in terms of getting a louder voice and a seat at the table.
Let me just interrupt because I think what you're stating is fairly well-known history, and I want to ask about what officials at U.S. Soccer came to learn, and very bluntly, why those officials did so little until the Department of Justice indicted Chuck Blazer and others who had longstanding ties to U.S. soccer, and particularly in light of the lack of comfort level that you had. In retrospect, what's the explanation?
I didn't, I was aware of some level of discomfort, but it was all, I think, in general, a general feeling. So I had no hard evidence, and we wanted to continue to participate and try to influence the organization of one of 209 members. The second choice we have is to opt out and to pull out. And with that comes a series of ramifications. We no longer have a seat at the table. We no longer are involved in the competitions, Olympics, World Cups, any competitions for our youth teams, our Paralympic teams. And it has far-ranging ramifications for U.S. soccer and soccer, in the business model of soccer in our country, which we have, through ownership of our professional ranks in all three divisions, invested hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, building the sport over the last 20 years, so we can continue to build and we can compete on the field in such a manner that we just accomplished on the women's side for the men.
I understand those two options, but wasn't there a third, which is to begin asking questions, begin an inquiry, begin shining a light, begin blowing the whistle, begin essentially holding accountable officials who might be guilty, and we now know they are, of wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, bribery, that directly impacted the quality and integrity of the sport that you are responsible for upholding?
Well, we did support the 2011 Ethics Committee, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. We pushed for full disclosure of the full report. As I said, we, front and center, were one of 6 nations that nominated Prince Ali to run against the longstanding Mr. Sepp Blatter, with great peril for the chance of hosting in 26. And having the FIFA Executive Committee seat, we continue to feel that that is a proper course of action to reform FIFA.
And I want to make clear, Mr. Flynn, that my comments are directed against the collective you, not you personally, the executive officers, the board members, the organization of the U.S. Soccer Federation. I want to ask you, as a matter of fact, why Mr. Gelati declined the invitation to be here today.
When the notice came to, of the hearing, we anticipated rather broad and specific questions potentially, and it was determined with outside counsel that I would appear before the Senate subcommittee hearing.
What's the reason that Mr. Gelati didn't?
I think it was a comfort level that I had more knowledge of the day-to-day operations in the event there were questions related to that.
Don't you think he has an obligation to answer the questions that we've been directing to you?
Senator, I would answer, if you're not comfortable with my answers, we'd be more than happy to respond in writing to your staff, anything directly related.
Will you commit that Mr. Gelati will answer these questions?
I will certainly do my best to do that, yes, sir.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. What is Sepp Blatter's continuing role in FIFA?
The best of my understanding, there is a special meeting the 20th and 21st, next Monday and Tuesday. From that, they have to do a 4-month notice, move forward, and there would be a new election for a president.
Will U.S. Soccer take the position that he should be in effect, excluded from FIFA?
Our position, I think, was pretty clear when we, in the last elections, nominated and supported Prince Ali. I don't know who the candidates are. I don't think anybody does yet. But rest assured, we will look at all of the candidates and their platform, from human rights to corruption to reform, before we make our decision.
One last question. Don't you believe now that U.S. soccer has a responsibility to do more? Its silence, in my view, has been deafening in many respects, to expose the wrongdoing and condemn it.
I'd like to address or answer your question. I think a real prime example of what we have done is the recent reform of CONCACAF. Those were sweeping reforms, from independent directors to greater transparency. We think that's a footprint that we'd like to bring forward to FIFA, recognizing that we're one of 25 on the FIFA Executive Committee, and one of 209 nations within the FIFA organization itself. So we pride ourselves in our leadership. We also understand at times the limited capacity that we have for reform.
My time has long expired, and I'm hopeful that we may have another round of questions. I want to defer to Senator Daines at this point.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Mr. Flynn, just to follow up on some of the questions that Senator Blumenthal was asking. How many years have you served as either CEO or Secretary General of U.S. Soccer?
Roughly 15 years.
15 years. And I understand Mr. Blazer, the indictments, it was Mr. Blazer and 14 others. Is that correct?
I couldn't tell you the exact number.
It was more than 10, yeah. And you mentioned the cold, hard facts, not having cold, hard facts, and at times having discomfort from having to step back. And I guess over a 15-year career, and we're going to get to the happier part of this here about what happened in women's soccer. Congratulations for that, by the way. It needs to be recognized, truly. A tremendous accomplishment.
Thank you.
But as regarding the discomfort that you felt at times, where you felt like you had to step back because perhaps there was a line crossed. If we look at what these indictments read, the bribery, the racketeering, and so forth, can you tell me about a time when you experienced discomfort and you stepped back because of what you were seeing?
No, as I stated, the discomfort was kind of in generalities. I will tell you in terms of how Mr. Warner, being one of 41 nations, 35 voting nations in CONCACAF, how he ran a meeting and went through an agenda and had hand votes versus sealed votes. Those are the kinds of discomforts that I would, that led me to some level of discomfort.
And in your distinguished 15-year career leading the organization, how long ago was it when you first started sensing perhaps something is wrong, perhaps a few bolts are loose here, perhaps there's discomfort as you sense? I mean, looking at what the indictments here, these things typically just don't happen overnight. This is probably building. And when did you start having some concerns?
It'd be hard to pinpoint. As I said, they're generalities, and they related to the manner in which Jack Warner and Mr. Blazer ran their meetings, and how I think U.S. Soccer would be like to have a greater influence. But being one of 35 voting nations, and mind you, Mr. Warner came from the Caribbean, and 25 of those 35 votes are from the Caribbean. It just gave me a level of discomfort that we weren't going to make progress in terms of transparency and some of the things that I would have preferred as to how U.S. Soccer operates.
And did you ever express any of those concerns to Mr. Blazer?
I did not.
Is there a reason, if you were seeing these issues, knowing what we know now, why you might not have confronted him or perhaps asked why he's doing what he's doing?
Generally speaking, it falls into that two-choice equation and framework. trying to participate. One of the key things we try to do, as an example, is try to host Olympic qualifying and host events. And we have to, at times, balance that with the potential to opt out. And with Mr. Blazer, I just felt that we had other things to do that could help build our sport as well. And there was some concern that if I brought it to Mr. Blazer's attention that I may feel some level of discomfort in a different way.
And did you see other peers experience discomfort in other ways who maybe tried to confront Mr. Blazer?
That would be hard to categorize it that way, but if we reached out and when we reached out to talk to other national associations, other federations, once again, we were one of 41 or one of 35 voting members, and there really weren't anybody else, there wasn't anybody else that had the same, maybe the same feeling that I did on a personal level or that we did as an organization. So we operated as best we could within the framework. Once again, we are in CONCACAF by virtue of being a member of FIFA. And we felt we had to find a way to participate, work our way through, and fortunate enough, by a very close vote, 18-17, Mr. Galati was elected to the FIFA Exco seat in April of 13. And we think that was a step in the right direction, a step towards reform, and that is the model that we felt was in the best interest of moving our sport forward in a very difficult and tricky environment sometimes.
I have one final question, then I'll wrap up here. Back on women's soccer here, on a happier note, the most watched soccer match in U.S. history, as many television viewers as Game 7 of the 2014 World Series. I was looking at the financial numbers here with the United States Soccer Federation, and just looking at the investments in the men's national team versus the women's national team. I said as a father of 2 sons and 2 daughters, so you probably see where I'm headed with this. The spending on the men's national team was up 50% fiscal 14 over 13, yet the spending for women's soccer actually went down, I think, 13% of fiscal 13 versus 14. Just in broad strokes, any reason why the men's soccer would have been up 50% and the women's down 13%?
Well, let me first say that thank you for your comments about our women's national team. We're quite proud of our track record with women's soccer. We are recognized as a world leader. And I give you a few small facts. U.S. Soccer's write-in campaign is the reason that women's soccer was admitted to the Olympics in 1996 and continues to this day. We are the top paid team in the world by far on the women's side. In 2003, when we hosted the Women's World Cup, the winnings, there were no winnings for any team, first, second, third, fourth, whatever. The winnings this time was $2 million. We continued to push FIFA in the right direction. Now, related to your direct question, if that was 2014, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it could be, and I'll be more than happy to follow up and provide in writing. It could be because of the 2014 Men's World Cup is a peak year.
Yep.
And it would create more activity. So I don't know the
It was what I was kind of sensing looking at it, but it might be worth a follow-up, just getting a sense of an investments, because hopefully we'll continue to invest in our women's soccer program, as you already have.
Sure.
But the men's program is growing, it's like significant. Women's coming down somewhat, and we're just so proud of what the women did, and want to make sure we continue to invest appropriately.
Thank you. If I could add, as a father of 3 daughters, we're quite proud of U.S. Soccer that, unfortunately, with 2 failed professional women's leagues, 3 years ago, we took it upon ourselves as a federation. We actually run the women's league. Rather than fund 25 to 30 women and cut the team down to 23, we're providing a first division women's soccer league for 180 women's professional soccer players in this country. And we think with the success that we had in Canada 10 days ago, that we'll have additional ownership and investment as well. So we're
Mr.
very,
Flynn, let
very
me
close
interrupt.
by.
We're about out of time. Thank you for that reply. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. I wanted to follow up on some of Senator Daines' questions, and of course, we're all very proud of the women's, U.S. women's team. And are you aware that we're putting together a resolution that's been put in from the Senate asking for equal compensation between men and women in FIFA and the soccer?
I am not aware of that.
Well, be ready for it.
Okay.
So, and I just think, given the U.S.'s emerging role in FIFA, and given what we've seen in the last few years with the corruption, I just think that while I appreciate that you say changes are being made, I don't think enough changes are being made. And I have some additional dollars from what Senator Daines was talking about. So the U.S. women team for the victory was compensated $2 million. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and the men's team, the Germans team, in 2014 was compensated $35 million. Is that right?
I think it was 32, but it might be
32 million, okay. So it's 2 million versus $32 million. And the losing team in 2014, which was the U.S. men, got $8 million. Is that
I believe it was 9 million.
9 million. Okay, so we have a situation where the losing team actually got more than 4 times the amount of money as the winning women's team. The
Correct.
losing
But
men's
let
team-
me point out, the winnings, just as a point of reference, I think, or background, the winnings payments go to the federations. So the payment to our players are guided and governed by separate collective bargaining agreements between the men and women. So that's one point I think, as a matter of background, that's important.
Okay, but I just to go back to this, and sometimes they say, well, women's sports don't get as much of attention, but we have a situation here where there's record attendance and TV ratings. Fox broke TV records in the U.S., making the World Cup final the most watched soccer telecast ever in the U.S., male or female. Yet you have this disparity, 32 million versus 2 million. And my argument would be that certainly the U.S. should be taking a lead in pushing for more equality here. In tennis, they have equality. Wimbledon last year decided to have equality in prizes, and it would seem to me like Wimbledon seems pretty old school. And soccer is supposed to be so nouveau and upscale and just, the cool progressive sport, and yet you have this disparity that I just think is outrageous.
We do agree, and we will continue to push for greater payments on the women's side without question.
Okay, I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Could you comment on why the Women's World Cup was played on artificial turf when the Men's World Cup was played on grass?
Sure, I'll give you a little bit of background. In order for Canada to receive the bid, Senator, they went through a bid process. Canada was the only nation that submitted a bid to host. As part of that bid, from our point of view, unfortunately, the bid included playing on artificial surfaces. It's not something that we liked. We appealed to FIFA and to the Canadian Soccer Association to no avail. When our players came to us and wanted to participate in some legal activity, we fully supported that. And at the end of the day, we posed the question to our women's team: if this is what we are faced with, do we want to move forward and play, or do we not want to play? And the women unanimously decided it's not perfect. We don't like what they felt, and we agreed it was a lack of respect. But we were moving forward, and in many respects, I think everybody would say we're pretty happy we moved forward under some not the best of circumstances, but coming away with our third World Cup, it was worth the investment.
And the salary range, I'll just end with that, the salary range of women and men. So I just got this from our staff. So men, the minimum salary is $50,000. Is that true for
$50,000 for
a male player? And then
in our
we have
collective
women
bargaining
ranging
agreement,
from $6,000 to $30,000.
I'm not sure what the reference is for that.
Do we know where that's from? This is professional soccer.
Yeah, I can't speak to Major League Soccer, if that's what the reference point is
Okay.
guided and governed by a collective bargaining agreement.
Okay,
I can tell you the women's national team
yeah,
players to play in our league is well above $6,000. And to play for their country as well as their clubs is well above $6,000. I'd be more than happy to follow up and give you
right.
more
And so
detail on
Just
that.
my view of this whole
Sure.
thing, going back to the, just the corruption and everything that's happened, and my colleagues have done a good job. I'm sure there's a lot more that Mr. Jennings would like to talk about. Going through all of that as a former prosecutor, I find the whole thing abhorrent, and I'm glad that these cases are being pursued. But it just seems in general, and the reason I bring up this women's issue is the U.S. Has had a shorter history on the international soccer stage, but has significant pull internationally, particularly with major corporate sponsorships of U.S. companies. And so what I'm advocating here is using that pull for not just reforms so that, and transparency in the international governance structure so that we don't see this
Right.
corruption and that it gets taken care of, but also so that women get treated fairly and equally as men. Because like I say, if they can do it at Wimbledon, they can do it with soccer.
Right. Thank you, Senator. Could I make one point? We are seriously the strongest advocate, I think, for women's soccer in the world. And just as a point, there were 24 teams in this year's World Cup. In 2011, there were 16. We were strong advocates and took a leadership position to expand. On the men's side, there's 32 teams that compete. So there's a greater number of games and a bit of a different commercial impact. But we continue to push FIFA and CONCACAF to expand the opportunities for women. And as a father with 3 daughters, rest assured, it's top of mind with me every single day.
Well, you can imagine just the women we feel in this
Absolutely.
building when we hear that our women players that everyone was watching was so proud of got less than a fourth of what the losing team did last year for the men. It's just not right.
It's been in the public a bit, but the women for playing in the World Cup and competing this year will receive over $300,000, just as a point of reference. But I'd be more than happy to give you additional information if
All
need
right,
be.
well, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
To all of you, and Senator Leahy is leading the resolution, so thank you.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. Let me ask Mr. Hershman. You heard the testimony of Mr. Flynn, who indicated that, as I would summarize his testimony, he's involved in the domestic side of the issues that were involving the U.S. Soccer Federation. And I think his testimony would reflect that he and his colleagues, no one reported to him any concerns or knowledge of any corruption, bribery, racketeering. I think his testimony would suggest that he had he was unaware of the activity that led to the indictments. That suggests to me that, and I don't know exactly what Mr. Flynn does, but he's the CEO. What is it that needs to change structurally that this kind of behavior at FIFA would be known by the U.S. Soccer Federation? What's missing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I think you have to understand the nature of the beast. FIFA is like no other organization that I've had an opportunity to consult with on issues related to governance and compliance. I want to correct a statement that Mr. Barry had said earlier. FIFA is not an international organization. It's not an NGO. It's not a corporation. It doesn't follow any guidelines or standards. What exemplifies FIFA is a small clique of very powerful individuals whose self-dealing was kept very secret at the top level of the organization. It's no surprise to me that an individual federation like the U.S. Soccer Federation didn't understand what was going on. This organization, as pointed out by the Justice Department, had systematic corruption. And for years now, for over 10 years, in the midst of many scandals, and even going back before 10 years when Mr. Jennings was aggressively reporting on lack of transparency and accountability, The organization answered to one man and one man alone, and that man controlled this organization with an iron fist and an iron grip. And that was the president of the organization, Sepp Blatter. When he wanted someone to know something, he would let them know. Otherwise, they'd be in the dark. And it is discouraging to me that President Blatter sits in that same seat today. Let there be no mistake. He has not resigned. He has said he'll step aside when a new election is called. Well, he's said twice in the past, in recent history, that he would not run for office again and change his mind. I'm very concerned that he'll do the same thing again, that 6 months from now, he will say the reform initiative is now complete, I've succeeded, and the federations from Africa, the federations from Asia want me to continue, so I've decided to stay as president. That would be the worst thing that could happen for FIFA.
Therefore, Mr. Hershman, in your opinion, your testimony is that the best thing that could happen to clean up FIFA is for the departure of Mr. Blatter?
Not only Mr. Blatter, there are dinosaurs in the executive committee that don't believe in reform. But let me say this. We're going to see next week at the executive committee meeting, FIFA executive committee adopt new reforms. Reforms that we recommended years ago to be adopted and that were put aside. It's not what's on paper. It's not going to be the compliance program. It's not going to be the change in governance structure. It's going to be the culture of the organization that has to change. And you can't have a change in culture unless you have people within in leadership that believe in ethics and values.
Let me ask you this then. What is the motivation for that change to occur? What needs to happen through the U.S. Soccer Federation, others around the globe? Today, what we're doing here have any consequence on these issues? Because what I assume that the opponent to change is financial. There is apparently significant amounts of money that surround FIFA and those involved in this, what you describe, culture. So how is it that, what steps need to be taken to overcome that culture today, tomorrow, and into the future?
We need to build a coalition. Number one, the sponsors have got to take, and not only the sponsors, but the media outlets that bid on media rights, they have got to take a stand. When an individual athlete, be it Tiger Woods or be it Ray Rice, does something wrong, the first thing that happens is the sponsor walks away from that relationship. FIFA has been the subject of scandal after scandal after scandal, and no sponsors have taken the lead in withdrawing their support for FIFA based on those scandals. So the sponsorships have got to be, the sponsors and the media outlets have got to stand up and say, if you don't reform, if you don't do the right thing, we're going to walk away. The federations, like the U.S. Soccer Federation, have got to come together. Those with similar cultures, similar beliefs in transparency and accountability, and I do believe that that's the belief of the U.S. Soccer Federation, have got to come together from the bottom up and force change at the top. And finally, governments, many governments provide subsistence to sports federations, not necessarily in the United States, but overseas governments spend millions of dollars in taxpayers' money supporting their domestic and international sports organizations. They have got to intervene and let them know that the time is ripe for change. Even here in the United States, while we don't spend taxpayer money on supporting our domestic sports organizations, the NFL, we provide them with tax-exempt status, with exception from antitrust laws, which is worth a great deal of money to them. And so governments have also got to influence sports organizations to undertake transparent and accountable governance.
Let me ask you, Mr. Jennings, what needs to transpire? Perhaps the same question I asked Mr. Hershman. What needs to transpire today, tomorrow, that would give you hope that the corruption that you have described would be resolved internally and within FIFA, and perhaps your answer based upon your testimony is FIFA has no future, it has to be replaced. Is that different than what Mr. Hershman's saying?
Very mildly from Michael. Yeah, FIFA's got to be dissolved. They don't want reform. We use words like reform. They think boring. Everything works fine. Okay, if you get arrested, Mr. Gotti went on for years as members of his family got picked off, but the operation went on. And I would just like to come back to CONCACAF because I'm quite astonished at what I hear about. They're going to have a reform meeting. They've had one. Well, that would be the third one, I think, wouldn't it? Because when Mr. Blazer and Mr. Warner were out, thank goodness, they had reforms. They had reform meetings. They pledged transparency, and they brought in two men, Jeffrey Webb from Cayman and Mr. Sanjie, is it, from Traffic, from the corrupt sports marketing company. And a few years later, the FBI going, can you step this way, please, sir? So now they're doing it again. And who's there? Is Horace Burrell there, the man who put his girlfriend into vote at the FIFA Congress in 1998? And I've got the document if you want to see it. They are so corrupt. But do you know, the USF, United States Federation, has been cowardly because little Peter Jenkins, you know, was it from St. Kitts? You know, not a powerful country, had the guts to stand up and say Jack Warner is stealing tens of millions of dollars of FIFA money that should be developing the sport in the Caribbean. He had the guts to say it. Warner and Blazer turned their poison upon him. He just survived. But he had the courage to do it. Where was America?
Let me ask Mr. Flynn, in your testimony, I just made notes, so this won't be identical to what you said, but your testimony was that you could encounter potential political impact. Yeah, you indicated you opposed, that the U.S. Soccer Federation opposed the re-election of Mr. Blatter.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. You indicated in your testimony that the U.S. Soccer Federation voted for someone other than Mr. Blatter to chair. And
Be the president, correct.
Correct. And your testimony had something along these lines, and that could have caused potential political impact and our chances to host the World Cup. That suggests to me that there is an awareness that the decision about where a World Cup soccer match is going to be played is, you would admit, is not necessarily based upon the merits. If you're worried about a vote for the chairman of FIFA having a consequence on site selection, that suggests to me that you're aware that something is not above the board, or am I overstating that?
Senator, I think it reflects a management style, and that's what I was trying to impart. Mr. Blatter wields as others have said, a lot of influence in the organization, in taking our position to not only vote openly, but to nominate Prince Ali and work very hard for his election. We know that that may come with some difficulties down the road in terms of seeking support for hosting the 2026 World Cup as part of Mr. Blatter's management style.
Thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jennings, would you agree, based on your experience, that American corporate sponsors like Nike, McDonald's, Visa, and Coca-Cola have been, in some sense, enablers?
Inadequate. They've had terrible attacks of blindness, haven't they? When the rest of the world has been categorizing, listing corruption at FIFA and at CONCACAF, and documented. The sponsors have said, oh, well, we only support the World Cup, we don't support FIFA. Well, isn't that tough and brave of them?
Maybe I should amend my question to say they certainly would be enablers now if they continued to be sponsors without insisting on reforms. Would you agree?
I think so. They should withdraw unless their money, the money that Herr Blasser likes so much, should be withheld until something radical happens to clean up the sport in the interests of the grassroots.
In fact, there's precedent, for example, in the way that Nike dealt with Tiger Woods following some of the revelations and public disclosure.
That's a very limited case which got huge publicity because it dealt with the private life of a celebrity. It gets a lot of tabloid coverage.
But whether it's private life and morality or, in this instance, public corruption, it should be addressed.
Oh, yes, and they have the capacity, they have the wealth, they have the brains and experience in their head offices from Beaverton to Atlanta and to Chicago, and they haven't done anything, and they should be trying to not justify, they should be apologizing, because Mr. Flynn has talked a lot about the organization of American football, not particularly soccer, not particularly relevant to the issues at hand about corruption at FIFA. Nevertheless, the mums and dads, my granddaughter plays football in the park in Seattle. You know the sort of people I'm talking about, the families, the lower level, not just the stars of your male and female teams. They have been betrayed by an organization that suns itself in the glamour of these brilliant women and brilliant men. The men are doing better every World Cup, you've noticed, without actually doing anything to say, we're America.
Mr. Barry, would you agree that American corporate sponsors have turned a blind eye to the alleged human rights abuses and potential deaths of migrant workers involved in human trafficking in the World Cup host nations? Should they have known? Did they know? Should they have done something?
You just said it. I can't cap that. Of course, the answer is yes.
And Mr. Barry?
There's definitely been a startling lack of attention by many parties involved with FIFA and the World Cup to the serious problems of labor exploitation in Qatar today. Thousands upon thousands of foreign migrant workers in Qatar are forced into a terrible, terrible system that can lead up to forced labor in some cases. And it's time for the sponsors of the World Cup, it's time for the contractors and the businesses involved with the World Cup, as well as the host government itself, Qatar, to start taking action and doing something about this labor rights crisis.
And they can have an impact, can't they, simply by virtue of their power of the purse and dollars and investment?
The sponsors of the World Cup can definitely play a serious and constructive role in averting the labor rights and the labor rights crisis that's happening and the labor exploitation that's plaguing the construction for the World Cup in 2022.
Mr. Hershman, do you agree?
I do agree. Look, these sponsors spend tens of millions of dollars to protect their brands. They themselves adopt governance programs and compliance standards that are best practice recognized globally. What does it say about them when they're willing to partner with organizations that have the record that FIFA has?
And Mr. Flynn, do you agree with the views that have been stated here?
We're happy to have the sponsors weigh in on this particular issue. As a point that's, I think, worth making from a U.S. soccer perspective, when these things come to light, we have spent a lot of time with our sponsors explaining the difference between U.S. soccer, CONCACAF, and FIFA. And I think the sponsors welcomed that opportunity of discussion with us, and we're happy if they weigh in on these particular items and issues.
In your view, Mr. Jennings, is FIFA salvageable?
Salvageable? No, not at all. The corruption is so deeply embedded that if you cut the head off the snake, the rest of it will still be wriggling about. America has to, with its moral values, join with other countries with similar moral values and just say, you stay there in Zurich, we're out of here. We're not going to be contaminated by sitting at your meetings with a bunch of organized crime experts. That's what FIFA is, and it was very good to see your FBI, your Department of Justice, has assessed them like that. I thought that before. I was very glad that they came aboard. You don't go to John Gotti and say, Mr. Gotti, there's really too much heroin on the streets of New York. Could you cut back on it a bit? Oh, thank you. A couple of keys come off the street. Well, that's all right. That's not how you dealt with it with the mafia in Boston, is it? You went after them.
Mr. Flynn, is FIFA salvageable?
I would address that by looking at the recent reforms of CONCACAF. They've been sweeping. I think they're real. I would like to give it hope that that footprint could be used. I'm not an organizational expert, maybe like Mr. Hershman, but I think that's one option. I can tell you the weekend of the Women's World Cup final, there were 2 other confederations from around the world that were represented in Vancouver that were very well aware of the sweeping reforms. We're pleased. Hopefully that footprint is at least one step in the interim, in the short term, to reform FIFA.
But apart from what CONCACAF has done, have you seen a tangible, meaningful effort at reform in FIFA? And doesn't that have to happen for it to be salvageable?
I've seen attempts, and unfortunately, they've come up short. And we continue, once again, as one of 209 nations to build coalitions and work with like-minded national associations. We think, given our structure, who we are, that's a good model for us to move forward. We're open to other discussions, as always, and we will be doing so with the candidates that are all running for the new, for the presidency moving forward for FIFA as well. I think that is going to be an interesting opportunity to see what platforms the candidates bring forward.
Will U.S. Soccer withdraw from the structure that supports FIFA if it fails to take meaningful reforms?
As I said before, I think we have the 2 choices of participate or opt out. The opt out is a very difficult and severe, has severe ramifications to our model for the sport. So I'd like to think that we can push for reform given the new platform and level of intensity, not only from the U.S. Senate, but from other parts of the world that feel now is the time to make the many changes that need to be made in terms of reform for FIFA.
Well, as a fan, as well as a public official, as a parent, let me just suggest that sometimes inaction and silence signal complicity. And there'll be a point where, in effect, U.S. Soccer is complicit in the ongoing lack of reform or action. You may have no direct control over it, but I respectfully suggest that that may be something you want to consider more seriously. Let me ask whether you will commit to U.S. Soccer conducting an independent inquiry, as happened in the wake of the Salt Lake City scandal.
Senator, we will cooperate with any inquiry that's brought to our attention.
Well, again, I'm suggesting that you take action, that U.S. Soccer take action to conduct the inquiry. You certainly have the resources, and again, I respectfully suggest you have the responsibility.
I think if one of 209, whether we initiated that, I think it'd be safe to say we're going to need the assistance and help of other like-minded nations. So we're committed to certainly have those dialogues and those discussions.
Are you committed to seek such an inquiry?
We're committed to work with other national associations to reform FIFA.
My time has expired. I have additional questions, but I have to go vote. We're sort of staggering our terms here. If my chairman,
Mr. Chairman, for the day.
if my chairman will take over and ask sufficient questions, I'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience, and I think there's some other members who want to join us, but this may turn out to be our last round. There's another committee hearing in this room later this afternoon. Let me go back to an issue that I mentioned in my opening statement and explored a moment ago with Mr. Barry, because I don't want this issue of loss of life to get lost in the conversation about governance. I think they're related, so I'm not trying to prioritize one over another, but I want to make certain that as a result of this hearing, there's an awareness by Americans, by the world, about what you've discovered in your investigation in the activities leading up to the games of the future. Let me ask you, Mr. Barry, again, if you want to describe in more detail the findings of what's transpiring there and what your request would be for us to make certain that these practices come to a conclusion. What role can we play as the United States?
Thank you, Chairman. Amnesty International's report, Promising Little, Delivering Less, is the latest report that goes into the massive problem of labor exploitation in Qatar. The problem, as we've heard, starts with laws that prevent migrant workers from leaving their employers or leaving the country when they're put in situations that rise to even the risk of starvation. But it goes beyond that. As you've alluded to, Chairman, within Qatar today, there are serious health risks and a lack of accountability and due diligence when it comes to the sites where workers, foreign migrant workers, are doing the hard work and putting in the sweat of all of the construction, the hundreds of billions of dollars of construction that are going on in Qatar today. There have been numerous reports about deaths. The governments of India and Nepal have reported that in 2014, over 400 of their nationals in Qatar have died in a whole host of ways and for a whole host of reasons. What is highly problematic is that the government of Qatar has not put in the effort to do a serious investigation as to how foreign migrant workers are dying in Qatar and why. This lack of any sort of investigative interest or effort by the government of Qatar reveals potentially a lack of interest in finding out the answers as well as the next steps to solving the problem. The government of Qatar needs to take substantive steps to investigate the deaths that are happening in Qatar today, deaths that have ended the lives of many foreign migrant workers who came to Qatar from many parts of the world simply to earn money and to send the money back home to communities and families in poorer parts of the world where they do not have the employment opportunities that they need.
Let me ask Mr. Jennings an additional question. You're our witness from outside, outside the United States. What influence do you think that America has in regard to reforming FIFA?
I'd rather say change, but otherwise we are agreed. Well, I suddenly learned today that America's a terribly unimportant little country that's terrified of countries like Guinea-Bissau not agreeing with it. When the United States Olympic Committee realized it had a massive moral problem over its relationship with the crooks at the International Olympic Committee, it didn't go and ask anybody else. You don't have to go and ask the rest of the world, is it all right if we have an inquiry in America into our own people? Please. I find this very dispiriting about this view of America as being gutless, because that is what is being suggested. Get on and do it. Don't ask permission of some other countries. It's your country, and you have screwed up with FIFA and CONCACAF. I hear a talk about reforms. I don't believe it from CONCACAF. Was Horace Burrell there? The same bunch of crooks who've been there for 20 years. Oh, but you can do it. I mean, it's not that you've got nuclear weapons that matters. You've got the sponsors. You've got the media. You've got the moral power of this huge country. And Europe will come with you like a shot. Western Europe will be straight in with you saying, can we join as well, please? They just need some leadership, and they're not getting it.
Mr. Jennings, you must think there's a sufficient value in this hearing that's taking place right now here, that you came from Britain to the United States to testify. What do you hope comes from this hearing today? What can you expect? What would your desires be that we accomplish?
As we were saying earlier, and as Mr. Blumenthal was mentioning, the independent inquiry, similar to the United States Olympic Committee, is the first essential, because then you look in the mirror with US soccer and you see where you went dramatically wrong. That inquiry could go back into how you were blind and deaf and dumb over the CONCACAF problems, how you've walked away from problems at FIFA. America doing that would have other countries saying, oh, yeah, we can do this as well. So I would hope that you do set up independent, not with the permission of Guinea-Bissau or Tanzania, but your own commission of inquiry. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is this farce going on. Blatter's going to set a date, possibly, for a Congress. I will tell you from own inquiries, there are no Congress facilities booked for the rest of the year by FIFA in Zurich. He's going to stay there and wait for us all to get tired and go away. It's always worked for him in the past. Only the FBI can sort him out. But you can walk away. Or you're cowards, you're weak, and you have no perspective on the rest of the world. And I don't think that's true of America generally.
Mr. Hershman, you were, let me look and see the right words, member of FIFA's Independent Governance Committee. What didn't occur? It appears to me that there was an effort at changing previously. You were involved in that effort to make a change, but it didn't happen. Is that an accurate analysis, and why not?
Well, it is an accurate analysis. Look, we came in as a group of independent compliance experts and sports experts to look at the internal checks and balances of FIFA, to look at their compliance and governance procedures. We did so. We made a number of recommendations, many of which, by the way, were adopted by FIFA. For example, establishing a new ethics committee with 2 co-chairs, independent outsiders, one to do investigations and an adjudicatory chamber of ethics committee. We established an independent chair of the audit committee of FIFA. But frankly, when it came to recommendations that I consider to be no-brainers because they are common standards around the world, including term limits for executive committee members and the president, including transparency of compensation. To this day, no one knows what the president of FIFA is paid, nor what the members of the executive committee are paid. When it came to having them create an independent outside oversight body to ensure that governance and compliance programs that we recommended were being implemented, they turned that down as well. So a number of key recommendations that might have made a difference were turned down. Having said that, I want to emphasize that I don't believe even if they had adopted the recommendations without a change in leadership, without a change in culture, we would have seen much different.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn, the U.S. Soccer Federation, particularly according to Mr. Jennings, has a greater role to play. I want to make certain that you have a chance to tell us anything that you'd like for us to know, to, in a sense, set the record straight if there's something that you feel needs to be said. And also to ask you the question, is there something that you would ask from us as we try to ally in the efforts for change, reform, improvements?
Thank you, Senator. Well, I think one point I'd like to crystallize is that U.S. Soccer would support an inquiry. As a national association, I don't believe we have the authority to do so under the current governance. As it relates to your question, what the U.S. Senate could possibly do, we welcome any opportunity for the U.S. Senate to weigh in with your counterparts in Qatar or Russia, whoever it might be, for any particular issue. We would welcome that and be ready to work with you on that as well.
Do you know if there's any ongoing conversations between U.S. Government officials and other countries associated with FIFA and these allegations and criminal indictments related to corruption at FIFA? Do you know whether our government is associating with other countries trying to facilitate change?
Senator, I am unaware of any activity.
Okay. Excuse me just one moment. I'm going to recess the hearing just for a moment. Mr. Blumenthal is on his way back from a vote. I'll go cast the next vote and I'll be back. But we'll have a brief, subject to the call of the chair, recess, which might be of value to those of you who have been sitting there for a bit. So that the subcommittee is recessed until the call of the chair.
Few questions. Mr. Flynn, would you commit to establish a better system of accountability within U.S. soccer through some kind of internal inspector general, a watchdog protection system?
I'm sorry. We actually, through our outside counsel, have hired someone to look at all of our ways in which we govern ourselves, and that process has been started and supported by our board as well.
When will that process be completed?
It's just started, so I think it would be a better approach for us to get back to you with the timeframes once we have a chance to discuss in more detail.
Mr. Hershman, you testify that sports are undermined by a lack of accountability, and I agree. Would you say that that kind of voluntary system is sufficient to bring some higher degree of integrity to a corrupt system, or at least U.S. soccer has been involved in a corrupt system, or should sports entities be in some way overseen or scrutinized or regulated by a public authority?
I don't want to see government take away total autonomy from sports organizations. I don't think that would be the right way to go. But I do think if voluntary standards and principles are not adopted and enacted, then government should set up some sort of regulatory protocol to ensure that sports organizations are keeping best practices and standards. There's a tremendous threat to sports worldwide. It hasn't completely hit the shores of our country yet. Illegal gaming in sports totals about $500 billion a year. Let me repeat that, $500 billion a year is bet on sports illegally. That has led to an increase in match fixing, which has become endemic in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. While we haven't experienced it here, it's rearing its ugly head. 6 weeks ago, a gambler from Detroit was sentenced to 6 years in prison for paying college basketball players to fix matches. And so what I'm hoping this committee will do and what our government will do is get ahead of the curve to begin to see that certain standards are put in place voluntarily or otherwise in order to bring hopefully to bring some of the well-known purity back to sports.
Mr. Hershman, you said that members of FIFA's executive committee should disclose their salaries, I believe.
That's correct.
Mr. Gelati is on FIFA's executive committee. Mr. Flynn, do you agree that he should disclose his earnings?
I believe that we have pushed for change on that, and I believe that U.S. Soccer, and we would support that, yes.
Actually, if I might interrupt, Senator, Mr. Gelati, before he was appointed to the executive committee, he served with me on the Independent Governance Committee, and he voted in favor of our recommendation for compensation transparency.
Can we expect that'll happen then, Mr. Flynn?
We'll do everything we can within our power of the United States Soccer Federation. Ultimately, I believe that's going to be a FIFA executive committee vote.
When will FIFA make that decision?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm more than happy to follow up and get you that.
I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Barry, can you tell the committee what more you think FIFA can do, very specifically and directly, to stop human rights abuses, including human trafficking, exploitation of child labor, horrific working conditions, illegal holding of passports, in effect, involuntary confinement of workers, and other abuses involved in construction, in host facilities, in hotels? The breadth of these violations, I think, has been somewhat inadvertently lost in these proceedings, which have focused more on the corruption, the overt criminal corruption, and yet these human rights abuses are real and unspeakable.
You're absolutely right, Senator. The bottom line is that there are two big pieces of the puzzle that FIFA can help solve when it comes to addressing the major problems of labor exploitation in Qatar today, and potentially in future countries that will be future host countries for the FIFA World Cup. The first piece of the puzzle is the question of what the evaluation process is during the bidding process to be a potential host of the World Cup. Now, FIFA has said that for the 2026 World Cup, it's going to include human rights requirements in its bidding process. It's unclear right now as to what those human rights requirements are going to be, and any such initiative must result in FIFA having adequate human rights due diligence systems in place so that FIFA can become aware of and prevent human rights abuses as a consequence of the staging of World Cup events in the future. So that's the first piece, the evaluating of bids to be a host country. Any such evaluation in the context of Qatar, for example, would have revealed serious problems when it comes to labor exploitation, rising up to forced labor, and, you know, as we've spoken about earlier in this hearing, the risk of injury and death to some foreign migrant workers in the country. The second piece of the puzzle, though, for FIFA is what happens when it raises an issue verbally or via text to the host government, in this case Qatar. The government of Qatar then says, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and then a year later, as Amnesty International has documented in our report, the government of Qatar largely fails to address the issue. Verbal assurances are not enough, and so there's a real question for FIFA as to what happens now. The clock is ticking, and it's not enough to wait 5 years from now to have serious reforms when it comes to labor rights in Qatar. Every day that goes by is another day that more of the hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure for the 2022 World Cup are already built and completed. And every single day that goes by without labor reforms in Qatar is another day in which a foreign migrant worker is potentially subject to forced labor. It potentially puts their life at risk in a very unsafe construction facility, potentially comes home to a filthy set of housing accommodations, or is potentially simply denied their pay while their family is at risk of being evicted from their home. And so for FIFA, the real question is, what are they going to do now when a year after the government of Qatar has claimed that it's going to take steps to address the problem? The reality is that for some of the worst human rights violations in Qatar in the context of labor exploitation, not enough has been done.
I want to just add one last, or maybe two last questions, one of them having to do with an issue raised by my colleague, Senator Klobuchar. I was astonished and troubled to learn that men's teams that exited in the very first round of competition in the World Cup were paid $8 million, an amount 400% greater than what the women world champions were awarded. Mr. Flynn, what can be done, and what are you planning to do to address this pay disparity?
Thank you. We are a strong advocate for the women's game. During the championship weekend, I met with the Canadian Soccer Association, my counterpart, who was the operating officer for the World Cup. We addressed several things in terms in an after-action report, being compensation, what I would call team environment, the types of hotels, the number of teams at hotels, all of those kinds of things should be included in an after-action report. We will continue then with our FIFA Executive Committee member, Mr. Galati, to push for continued development on the women's side and continued, and one of those items would be an increase in compensation for those competing and participating teams in the World Cup and other competitions potentially as well.
Thank you. I will have more questions for you on this issue. I will submit them in writing. I think your testimony, all of your testimony, has been very helpful and informative. In my view, this hearing is really only the beginning of an inquiry that the Congress has a responsibility to conduct. And that inquiry is only one step in a larger, very intensive and critical scrutiny that has to be given to the responsibility of United States sports organizations. We have spent a good deal of time over the last 24, 48 hours talking amongst ourselves about issues of national security and the agreement that has been reached by the administration to stop nuclear proliferation, most specifically with Iran. The power of the United States consists not only of its military force, but its moral example. Its exceptionalism derives from its values and its ethics. And the fans here and around the world deserve better from the sports organizations that have responsibility to oversee and organize the game of soccer. Corruption is not a game. It is deadly serious, it is criminal, and it betrays the trust of fans. U.S. soccer, as I've said earlier, had a responsibility to know. Either it knew or it should have known, and the fans can judge which is worse. I want to thank you again for being here today, and hope that you will continue to cooperate with our inquiry. Thank you.
Mr. Blumenthal, thank you very much. This is our last round of questions. I'm going to bring this hearing to a conclusion, particularly under the assumption I may have suggested to you you needed a recess. So we're going to give you one. We're going to adjourn. But let me first say, before I do that, thank you all for your testimony. This is, in my view, something that is a very important issue, a very serious matter. Mr. Flynn, I particularly thank you for your testimony. And I want you and our audience, our witnesses, those who are paying attention to this hearing, that we want absolutely the best for U.S. soccer. I think the point I would make is that we can't tolerate the status quo, and that there are serious consequences from that status quo. They're real and, in some instances, life-threatening or perhaps life-taking. And we don't want another decision to be made for the next site for the World Cup that is subject to the allegations or the reality that corruption continues to occur. So from a senator, an individual senator, I just offer to you, Mr. Flynn, to U.S. Soccer Federation, the opportunity to work in any way we can to assist you as you make the effort to make sure the status quo is not continued. And I thank you very much for being here, as I would say to all of the witnesses here. Thank you for the serious nature in which we treated this topic. With that, let me say a few significant words that are necessary for the record, and that is that the hearing of the record of this hearing will remain open for 2 weeks. During that time, senators are asked to submit any questions in writing that they have for the record. Upon receipt by you, the witnesses, we would request that you submit written responses to the committee just as soon as possible. And with that, I will conclude this hearing and again thank the witnesses. This hearing is now adjourned.